Christopher Porco, born on July 9, 1983, is an American man convicted of second-degree murder and second-degree attempted murder in connection with the death of his father, Peter Porco, and the severe wounding and disfigurement of his mother, Joan Porco. The crime occurred on November 15, 2004, in Del Mar, New York. On November 15, 2004, Peter Porco, a 52-year-old state appellate division county clerk, was found dead of massive head injuries in his home in Del Mar, New York. His wife, Joan Porco, a children's speech pathologist, was discovered lying in the couple's blood-drenched bed with severe head trauma. She survived the attack but lost one eye and part of her skull and suffered severe facial disfigurement. An axe belonging to the family, which was used in the attack, was found in the couple's bedroom. Bethlehem police soon focused their investigation on Christopher Porco, the younger of the couple's two sons, who was a student at the University of Rochester, 230 miles away. Christopher Porco was at the University of Rochester when his parents were discovered. He later said he learned of the attack from a reporter. He returned to Del Mar that evening. In late November 2004, outgoing Albany County District Attorney Paul Klein convened a grand jury to hear testimony implicating Christopher Porco in the murder. Those who were reported to have testified in the closed session hearing included Porco's friends from college, a university campus safety officer, and a former girlfriend. The grand jury would field more testimony before handing up an indictment against Christopher in November 2005, 1 year after the attacks. Christopher Bodish, a Bethlehem police detective, stated that as medical personnel attended to Joan Porco at her home, he took a moment to ask her whether she could identify her attacker. Bodish said that when he asked Joan if a family member had done it, Joan used her head to indicate yes. Bodish has maintained that when he asked her whether it had been her older son Jonathan, a naval officer stationed in South Carolina during the attack, she shook her head indicating it was not. However, she was said to have had nodded her head up and down indicating yes when he asked her whether Christopher was responsible. Joan Porco's alleged identification of her son Christopher may explain why Bethlehem police pursued her son so soon after the incident, rather than conducting a broader investigation of potential suspects. She also answered in similar ways to other separate questions. She was so seriously injured that Bodish believed her statement might qualify as a dying declaration. The murder gained greater attention in the Capital District as Joan Porco, emerging from a medically induced coma, maintained that her son Christopher had nothing to do with her husband's murder. During videotaped testimony submitted to the grand jury in December 2004, Joan testified about her family but did not identify her son as an attacker. Joan Porco was unable to remember the attack. 9 months later, she wrote a letter for publication in the Albany Times-Union about Christopher. I employed the Bethlehem police and the district's attorney's office to leave my son alone and to search for Peter's real killer or killers so that he can rest in peace and my sons and I can live in safety. Prior to the attack, there had been tension between Christopher Porco and his parents about money, including over loans Christopher had taken out to pay his tuition and to finance a new Jeep Wrangler. Following the fall 2003 semester, University of Rochester's officials had forced Christopher Porco to withdraw because of poor grades. When he was readmitted the following year, he took out a loan for $31,000 to pay his expenses, forging his father's name as a co-signer. Unbeknownst to his parents, Christopher was attempting to pay for his fall 2004 tuition with it. Earlier in the fall, he had told his parents he had been readmitted to the University of Rochester after the school determined a professor had misplaced his final exam from the previous fall semester, and in compensation that their son's tuition would be covered by the college. 2 weeks before his murder, Peter had confronted his son about his dishonesty in an email. "Did you forge my signature as a cosigner? What the hell are you doing? You should have called me to discuss it. I'm calling Citibank this morning to find out what you have done, and I'm going to tell them I'm not to be on it as a cosigner." The following day, Peter Porco was notified that Christopher had also obtained a line of credit from Citibank to finance the Jeep Wrangler, again using his father's name as a cosigner. Peter once again wrote to his son, who had not answered his parents' phone calls in weeks. "I want you to know that if you abuse my credit again, I will be forced to file forgery affidavits in order to disclaim liability, and that applies to the Citibank college loan if you attempt to reactivate it or use my credit to obtain any other loan." The email concluded, "We may be disappointed with you, but your mother and I still love you and care about your future." Christopher Porco told investigators that on the night of November 14th, he had retired to a dormitory lounge to sleep and awoke the following morning. The police theory was that he instead drove more than 3 hours to Albany in the early hours of November 15th to attack his parents. A New York State Thruway toll collector outside Rochester said a yellow Jeep Wrangler with large tires passed through his station at about 10:45 p.m. on November 14th, and a collector in Albany recalled the excessive speed of a yellow Jeep Wrangler approaching the toll plaza shortly before 2 a.m. on November 15th. 4 security cameras at the University of Rochester recorded a yellow Jeep Wrangler like Porco's leaving the campus at 10:30 p.m. on November 14th and returning at 8:30 a.m. on November 15th, this being the period during which prosecutors claimed the Porcos were attacked. A neighbor of the Porco family later testified at trial that he saw Porco's yellow Jeep in the family's driveway on the evening of the attack. Also, University of Rochester students testified that they did not see Christopher sleeping in a dormitory lounge on the night of the attack. Much attention has been focused on the personality of Christopher Porco. Police contended that his behavior is consistent with a diagnosis of psychopathy or sociopathy, two similar though not identical disorders characterized by traits such as egomania, pathological deception, scamming and defrauding others, and lack of conscience or remorse. For example, Porco lied to obtain both a car and tuition payments. He also lied to fellow students to make it appear that he came from a wealthy family with oceanfront homes. Michelle McKay, a law clerk who worked with Peter Porco, said he described his youngest son as a sociopath. Professor Frank Perry has argued that police interviews with Christopher Porco were seriously flawed because police questioning procedures seemingly failed to account for Porco's probable psychopathy. During the course of their investigation, authorities determined that Chris had a history of antisocial behavior that included burglarizing his parents' home. In 2005, Bethlehem police detectives traveled to San Diego, California to retrieve a laptop computer that Christopher Porco had stolen from his parents' break-in on July 23, 2003, while he was home from college. Porco had sold the laptop on eBay. 8 months earlier, on November 28, 2002, police contend Christopher also staged a burglary at his parents' home in which he took a Macintosh laptop computer and a Dell laptop computer. A camera reported missing from the burglary was recovered from the couple's front yard. 1 month before the attack, both Chris and Jonathan Porco had their eBay accounts frozen because they shared the same Delmar address. Christopher had not sent several customers the items they paid for from his account. During their investigation, prosecutors discovered that Christopher posed as his own brother, sending emails to the customers explaining that his brother had died and was unable to deliver on the items. While away on a trip to England in March 2004, Christopher received an email from Joan Porco's account admonishing him for failing classes at Hudson Valley Community College in Troy, New York. In the message, Joan and Peter complained to their son, "You just left, and we can't believe our eyes as we look at your grade report. You know what they say, 3 strikes and you're out. Explain yourself." The email subject header was "Failing grades, you did it again." Several days later, Christopher replied in a message to his father, blaming the community college officer of register. He wrote, "Obviously, they are incorrect. My lowest grade that I got on anything was a B on a physics test. Don't jump to conclusions. I'm fine." Porco earned readmission to the University of Rochester with a forged transcript from HBCC. Judge Berry refused to allow prosecutors to use the forged transcripts as evidence in their criminal case against Christopher Porco. Chris Porco's employer, veterinarian John Kearney, testified at trial that Porco had been trained in cleaning up after animal surgeries. After the trial, jurors commented that his testimony helped to explain the fact that police did not find blood in Porco's vehicle after the attack. Chris's brother, Jonathan Porco, testified at his trial. According to the Albany Times-Union, Jonathan's testimony influenced the jury. His demeanor towards Chris was icy, and he described their relationship as strained. Defense attorney Terrence Kindland emphasized that the Bethlehem Police Department had no physical evidence linking Christopher Porco to the attack of his parents. No fingerprints were recovered from the fire axe found at the scene of the crime. Kindland co-counsel and wife Lori Shank maintained that police overlooked the possibility that Peter Porco's death was the result of retaliation against his uncle Frank Porco, a captain in the Bonanoa crime family in New York City. Frank Porco had served 2 years in prison for loan sharking and extortion, although Shank incorrectly told jurors that he had been indicted for his involvement in a murder. Shanks noted that Frank Porco's nickname with the mob was the Fireman, which could have had something to do with the type of weapon that was found, a fire axe. He had served in the New York City Fire Department. The trial was moved to Orange County because of the intense coverage in the Albany area. On August 2nd, 2006, the prosecutors completed its case against Porco, and the defense's case, which was much briefer, began. On the morning of August 10th, 2006, the jury began deliberations. Later that day, Christopher Porco was found guilty of second-degree murder and attempted murder. On December 12, 2006, Judge Jeffrey Berry sentenced Porco to 50 years to life on each count, totaling a minimum of 50 years in prison. Judge Berry was quoted as saying, "I fear very much what happened in the early morning hours of November 15th is something that could happen again. Porco will be eligible for parole in December 2052. Porco is incarcerated at Clinton Correctional Facility. Porco appealed his conviction to the Appellate Division, the 3rd Department, and the New York Court of Appeals, but both courts rejected his appeals. In 2006, the Porco case was the subject of an hour-long episode of 48 Hours, and they also made a Lifetime movie and titled it Romeo Killer.